All right. Let's talk about a topic that I don't believe gets enough attention, near enough attention at all. That's closing costs. And one of the biggest mistakes I see buyers make is assuming that the seller is going to pay all of my closing costs. And then they don't. Or the appraisal comes in low. Or the seller just says no. Or another buyer makes a stronger offer. And suddenly, my buyer is scrambling to come up with thousands of dollars. So today I'm going to explain why I encourage every buyer to prepare as if they'll need to cover their own closing costs, even if we plan to request seller concessions. And by the way, if you have a good real estate agent, they're going to be very skilled at negotiating seller concessions. All right, so I'm Richard Saling, a licensed loan officer, and one of the most common questions I get is, why are your closing cost estimates so high? They're, you know, this person over here has said they're much lower. The real estate agent that they're saying, the seller, or whoever it is, and the answer is going to be very simple, because I'd rather prepare you for the maximum reasonable cost than surprise you later. And I don't know what any of these costs are going to be yet. So I'm going to be conservative. So let's talk about why. First, what are the closing costs? The national average of closing costs is between 2% and 6% of the total purchase price. But what many buyers think is, well, my down payment is all I need. But actually, closing costs are completely separate. They include things like your title insurance, the escrow fees, lender fees, recording fees, the appraisal, the credit report, homeowners insurance, prepaid taxes, prorated taxes, prepaid interest. And these are all legitimate costs associated with purchasing and financing a home. So here's my philosophy. If I estimate $18,000 for your closing costs, and it turns out to be $15,000, you're going to be ecstatic, over the moon. But if I estimate $12,000 and the actual amount is $16,000, well, you're going to be mad at me, you're going to think I'm an idiot, and you're going to be looking for another lender. You're all stressed out, so I would much rather have you pleasantly surprised than financially burdened and have a negative surprise. So here is where many buyers get tripped up. They hear, well, we'll just ask the seller to pay your closing costs. Notice that word, ask. Now, the seller can agree, the seller can decline, or they can counter with a completely different amount. And in a competitive market, asking for seller concessions may even make your offer less attractive compared to another buyer who isn't asking for any concessions at all. So until both parties agree in writing, seller concessions are only a nice request, not a promise and definitely not a guarantee. So whether seller concessions are likely depends on market conditions. Now, if homes are receiving multiple offers, the seller has more leverage. If homes are sitting on the market and they've been on the market for, let's say, 6 months to a year or even more, buyers have a lot more negotiating power. And that's why there isn't a one-size-fits-all answer. So let's say the seller agrees to contribute toward the closing costs. Fantastic. But then the appraisal comes in below the purchase price. Now everyone has a new negotiation. Personally, I hear that and I'm thinking, okay, the appraisal came in low. This is a third party individual who is not tied to the outcome. So the seller really should consider lowering that purchase price. And sometimes the seller does reduce the price. Sometimes the buyer brings in other funds because that seller refuses to budge. And sometimes those seller concessions are adjusted. Sometimes the deal just falls apart because we can't come to an agreement. And this is another reason it's wise to have financial cushion instead of relying on one outcome. So I tell every one of my clients the same thing. Hope for seller concessions. Try to get seller concessions. Negotiate for seller concessions. But plan as though you're not going to receive any of them at all. If the seller contributes, fantastic. You're golden. You'll have a lot less to bring, for the closing. So more money in your pocket to use for other stuff. If not, you'll still be ready to move forward on this house. So think of it like going on a vacation. Imagine you budgeted $4,000 for a vacation. There's no emergency money, no cushion, and then all of a sudden, gas costs more. Hotel taxes are higher. There are some resort fees that you didn't plan on. Your flight gets changed. And the new flight, it costs more. Everything becomes a lot more stressful. Now imagine you budgeted a little more. Maybe you budgeted for $6,000 and you only spend $2,000. You come home with all that extra money. Or you have extra for more entertainment while you're on vacation. Buying a home works almost the same way. One of my jobs as a loan officer isn't just getting you approved and giving you the money, it's helping you prepare for the unexpected. And I would much rather be overprepared and have good news later than underprepare and create unnecessary stress during one of the biggest financial decisions of your life. So if you're planning to buy a home and you want to understand exactly what cash you'll need and why, I'd be happy to walk you through it. And every buyer's situation is different, and a little preparation today can make your closing day a whole lot smoother.